All right, let's talk the Daytona 500. This is the end of speed week, potentially depending on when they get some of these races in. As always, when NASCAR is town, that means it's going to rain. So not sure what's going to happen. It's Saturday morning at the moment, so not sure what's happening with this Xfinity race. Not really sure what's happening with this Daytona 500, the Cup Series race, but eventually they are going to run this race. And when they run this race, we want to be ready. So recording this video now, we have the starting grid, so I think we pretty much have everything that we need to attack the slate. Welcome to Fast Cars, Fast Money. This is our Daytona 500 breakdown. Here's just some ways you can support us if you appreciate our content or have been having a good week. So let's get into the race preview and initial thoughts. This is really the start of the 2024 season. Yes, you could have got some points technically in the dual races, and we did have a race at the Clash. But this is the first time we're going to have an official winner, and if you win this race, boom, you're locked into the playoffs already. As you've probably have seen, whether on this channel or other channels or articles or wherever you're getting your NASCAR content, DFS content, stack the back is really the approach, the slogan, the catchphrase, what you're going to hear all week long. We did put out an original strategy video that with a visual that's basically showing like, hey, drivers that start in the rear half of the field, the second half of the field, ideally towards the back, is what you want to stack. Those are the drivers you want to build around. Those are your core plays. Those are the drivers that have the most place differential upside. Why do we focus on place differential upside? Well, as you probably saw with the Truck Series race or the dual races, or just previous, super speedway races, we race in a pack here. Everyone is super close together. Lap sled kind of gets distributed throughout the field. Fast laps is just randomized, really pretty much whoever is kind of where they're at in the draft. So the most amount of upside you can get is from place differential, especially because with everyone running so close, there's usually chances of them wrecking out. I forget what the exact statistics were, but it was like, only 30 something percent of the field was finishing on the lead lap. 42% or something was like, DNFing. So there's a good chance that these drivers are going to have issues. We saw that with the Truck Series race, probably see that with the Xfinity Series, and we'll probably see that with this Cup Series race. So how do we want to attack? How can we potentially get different? Like you saw for the Truck Series race, there's some drivers that are going to start in the back half of the field that are good drivers on good teams. Those drivers carry a lot of ownership. Now, yes, some of those chalk plays normally do work out. However, they suck up a lot of the ownership. So maybe there's some plays around them that are going to see, 10, 15, 8, whatever percentage lower than the chalk play is. And that's some good ways, to potentially get different a little bit. And a lot of those plays offer, if not the same amount, even more upside than some of those chalk plays too. So we'll kind of go over that. Salary doesn't matter. Equipment, driver really isn't as important. It's really just, where you finish this race. You definitely need a little bit of luck surviving the big one, other crashes. You need crashes for this strategy to work out, but more often than not, that's what we get when we get to these super speedway races. Because of the chaoticness of dual race number 2, there are a lot of good cars that wrecked out that are getting just terrible starting spots. So there's a lot of chalk plays for this Daytona 500 race. We're going to have some cars drop into the rear of the field with backup cars. And remember, you're scored based off of your starting position, and that position is listed on DraftKings. So if they have a driver that starts 31st and they go to the rear half, they go to the rear of the field to start the race, they don't really start 40th and get additional points. They're scored from 31st. But I'm not concerned about anyone going to the back. So this is the driver by driver breakdown. I will post this on Twitter, on X at FastCarsFM. I'm going to wait to do that the morning of the Daytona 500. It's just going to get the most traction there. But I wanted to at least put this video out ahead of time for the people that subscribe to the channel. So thanks. All right, so let's talk about the expensive range here. You got Hamlin down to Keselowski. I guess a preface to this is really anyone in the top 10, I don't really want to play. Denny Hamlin, is one of those drivers. So yes, Denny Hamlin is arguably the best super speedway racer that we have in the field. The problem is where he starts. He carries way more downside than upside. And the other thing too is he's going to carry a lot of ownership. People like playing Denny Hamlin, especially on these plate races, but the upside really isn't there. I'd much rather focus on other plays in the second half of the field. You got Ryan Blaney and Kyle Busch. Both of these drivers are going to be very chalky. Both of them are going to be very high owned. I'm imagining that Ryan Blaney is probably going to be the highest owned driver on the slate. Now, yes, he can score very well. Um, he can win this race. He can, be one of the top plays on DFS. But we know that he's going to carry a lot of ownership, and maybe there's some plays around him in the 30s that offer very similar upside. They're going to see significantly less ownership. So yes, I'm going to be high on Blaney. I'm still going to have a lot of Blaney in my lines, but I'm probably going to be under the field, relatively speaking, on ownership, just because I'm going to attack some of those other, pivot plays. Kyle Busch is kind of in the same boat. I think Blaney's going to carry more ownership just because Ryan Blaney is really good on these super speedway races. Kyle Busch wrecked out. He's, in a backup car, but because of that, he has a really good starting position for the 500. So you'll see as we get further in the field with these starting positions, 35th, 34th, 32nd, 33rd, 30th, like those are really the plays that you want to build around. And that's the stack the back strategy, regardless of the price or who that driver is. Now, once you get to Larson and Keselowski, I'm going to rope them in together. They're going to be a little bit more tournament, GPP plays. They're going to see way less ownership than the Blaneys and the Bushes just because of where they start. They kind of start at the tail end of the first half of the field, so they still carry a little bit more downside than upside, but the place differential upside is still there. I'm not really going to be targeting these plays, but if I'm, building or running simulations or randomizing my lines, I'm going to include them in the player pool. I mean, they're not going to be popping off for me, but I don't mind getting a little bit of Larson and Keselowski in my lines just because they're not going to see the ownership. So more tournament plays if you're just taking a risk and you want to be more aggressive. I'm not getting to Chase Elliott or Joey Logano. Same reasons that we're not getting to Denny Hamlin. Let's look at their starting positions, fifth and first. Way, way more downside than upside, especially because we know the likelihood and the chances of all these drivers wrecking out. And typically we see these wrecks happen at the front half of the field. And I imagine that Elliott Logano is really aggressive, blocking, pushing. That is just a cause for concern when it comes to accidents. Now, Busher and Byron, I think you can throw in the same boat as Keselowski and Larson. They start a little bit further back, so a little bit more upside, probably going to be a little bit higher owned than Larson and Keselowski. And this is right around kind of where our player pool wants to really start. It's really drivers starting 20th on back is really our main focus. Once we get around that 20th, place starting position, that's really when you're going to see our ownership starts to really increase. So I haven't built any lines yet, but once I do build all my lines, you'll see majority of my ownership is going to be in the second half of the field. So they kind of start right in the middle, good cars, good teams, but we're really just focusing on that starting position. So they can really go either way. They could have a bad day, they could have a good day, they could have a so-so day. So because of that, again, not really target plays for me, but definitely still in the player pool. Bubba Wallace, I'll probably have more ownership to than I do with Busher, Byron, Larson, and Keselowski, just because of the starting spot. He starts in the second half of the field, a little bit towards the first half of the second half of the field. He's likely going to carry some ownership as well. He's pretty good on these super speedway races. So again, not a target play for me, but he's in the player pool. So I don't mind if you land on Bubba Wallace or have some Wallace in your plays. Now, Christopher Bell, we were really high on for the dual races. He actually won the dual race, but we don't want anything to do with him for the 500. Well, how can you be high on him, a couple days ago, and now you want nothing to do with him? Well, the reason is that starting position. That's really what the focus is. So it's not about the driver. It's not about the equipment. It's about that position. And he starts fourth, so there's just way too much downside for us there. Now, Truex is interesting. I think I'm probably going to be over the field on Truex just because he typically doesn't finish well on these super speedway races. He doesn't have the results. He doesn't have the wins. You'll probably see the broadcast mention it at some point in the race. However, for DFS purposes, starting 27th, he's in the second half of the field. He gives us more place differential upside than downside. And I don't think his ownership is going to be, I mean, he'll definitely see some ownership, but not nearly as much as like the Stenhouses, the Dillons, the Bushes, and the Blaneys. He doesn't give us, relatively the same amount of place differential upside, but it's close. So I'm gonna have him in lines. Chastain's really like the first driver of like the second half of the field. So not going to have as much Chastain as I do once we get deeper in the starting grid there, but I'm still going to have Chastain. I mean, he's in my player pool, and when I'm building my lines, randomizing those lines, it's really focusing on drivers 20th, to 40th. So he's in that player pool. He has slightly more upside than downside. Stenhouse almost starts DFL, really good. He won the Daytona 500 last year. He's going to see a lot of ownership. So just know it's another chalk play. Should score well, but a lot of people are going to have him in your line. So potentially if he wrecks out and finishes like 28th or 29th or something, that's a good way to get a little bit different, get some leverage on the field. So I'm still going to have ownership to all these high owned plays, but again, I'm probably going to be slightly under the field ownership wise, just because I'm going to attack some of the lower owned plays that we'll get to here. Tyler Reddick won dual race number one, but again, same reason for Christopher Bell. Not really interested in him for this Daytona race just because of where he starts. Johnson barely made it into the 500. That was crazy seeing him and JJ Yeley fight for that spot there. Yaley probably would have had it if it wasn't for that checkup and kind of getting out of the way. Otherwise, he would have plowed in the Chastain there. So Jimmy made it, but for DFS purposes, again, he's kind of in that same boat as Chastain. He's towards the first half of the second half of the field. So I'm not going to have a ton of Jimmy Johnson, but he's in my lines. I'm going to get ownership to him. I think he's fine for tournaments. He still gives us more place differential upside than downside, but not a core target focus play for us. Drivers starting 11th through 15th, I'm going to be low on. I'm really not getting to them. I'm completely fading the top 10, but when you get to drivers 11th through 15th, I might throw them in like one or two lines, depending on how many lines I'm building. If you're doing like 150 max, like maybe you get a little bit of Jones in there just to take some risk. Like he's not going to see ownership, but the reason he's not seeing ownership is he's not really going to project well, starting 11th. He could even finish 6th, which would be a good day for him, and he potentially could still get outscored if like the Stenhouses, the Dillons, the Blaneys, the Bushes, if they get good finishes just because of the significant amount of place differential upside that they offer. So just focusing on positions, Jones isn't really a target play for us, and you can really say that about anyone starting 11th through 15th. Not getting to Alex Bowman. Same reason I'm just not getting to anyone else in the top 10, just too much risk. Ty Gibbs, again, kind of in the same boat as Eric Jones. He gives us the most amount of place differential upside from that range, but there's still more downside than upside there. Austin Dillon, going to be popular because of his starting position. Very easy for him to score well. Even if he doesn't score well, like say he starts 33rd and he finishes 25th, like that's not a great day, but that's not going to kill your line. Versus if you roster Ty Gibbs and he starts 15th and finishes 25th, like that is, I don't want to say a lineup killer, but it's not going to help you, per se. So that's kind of the safety net that you have with some of these place differential plays in the back, that it's really easy for them to get positive place differential points and not kill your lines. Like when you're building lines, a lot of these drivers are going to wreck. When you look at DraftKings at the end, you'll see the little red car flipped upside down with the explosion saying that they wrecked out. I've had lines where, two, three, sometimes even four of my drivers have wrecked out, just depending on what contests I'm in. And you can potentially still cash just based off of ownership alone. So Dillon's in play, not getting to McDowell because of his starting position. He could win the race and still get outscored DFS purpose wise. Chase Briscoe, pretty much same as Chastain, right at that cutoff point. Really, Briscoe on back is our player pool. He offers the same amount of upside as he does downside. Not getting the Cindric starting 6th. You got Suarez through LaJoy in this range. Suarez is kind of in that no man's land, the 11th through 15th. Again, you can sprinkle him in a line or two, but I'm not really going there. I'm not going out of my way to get Suarez in my lines. Ryan Preece should be a relatively lower owned driver that starts in the second half of the field. So he doesn't give us as much place differential upside as some of these other plays that are further back, but he still gives us more, and he probably isn't going to see the same amount of ownership as some of these other back marker cars that start this deep. So I like Priest. I'll probably be over the field on Priest, but he's in the player pool. I really like Josh Berry starting 30th. I think he's not going to see the same type of ownership as some of these other plays that start deep in the field just because of who he is and the experience that he has. David Reagan starts DFL. He literally cannot lose you any points. So if he starts the race, he's giving you, even if he doesn't start the race, I think he still gives you positive points. Now, it might not be a lot of points, but, he's not going to lose you points. So he has the most amount of upside of anyone in the field. As long as he finishes this race, he's going to score you points. So I'm interested. John Hunter Nemechek, last driver in the top 10, not getting to him. Really like Noah Gragson. He did wreck out, have issues in the dual race, but that's why we see him starting so deep in this Daytona 500 race. A lot of place differential upside there. I don't think he's going to see the same type of ownership that, the Blaneys and the Bushes, the Stenhouses, the Dillons have, but he'll be high owned for sure. AJ Allmendinger and Corey LaJoy could be on medium on them. I think they're good pivot plays off some of these, high chalk plays. They give us a lot of place differential upside. So I'm going to have a lot of Allmendinger. I'm going to have a lot of LaJoy. They're still going to carry some ownership. Really good finish out of Hocevar in the dual races, but starting ninth, just not going to do it for us for the 500. Zane Smith might be one of the lowest owned drivers, if not Harrison Burton, in the field, just because of where they start. Really, really risky GPP play. Again, you can sprinkle Zane Smith, Harrison Burton into a lineup or two, but you don't really want to be playing too many of those drivers towards the front half. Haley and Gralla, probably going to be pretty low owned too, just because of the equipment they're in, where they start. But again, we're just focusing on that starting position, and we see it's at the second half of the field. They give us more place differential upside than downside. They're in their player pool. So I'm going to have Haley. I'm going to have Gralla. I like Todd Gilliland a lot, starting 31st. And then I really like these quote unquote, some of these back marker cars here with Alfredo and Herbst. They give us a lot of place differential upside as well. So really, again, to summarize, simplify it, look at the starting grid, focus on drivers in the second half of the field, find your cutoff points. Maybe it's 20th on back, maybe it's 25th on back, maybe it's 30th on back, and select your, however many drivers you want from that range. It could be 5 drivers, it could be all 6 drivers, it could be 4 drivers. And that's the way how I'm going to build. Again, I am going to be probably under the field on these chalk plays. I think Blaney's going to be chalk. I think Kyle Busch is going to be chalk. I think Stenhouse is going to be chalk. I think Austin Dillon is going to be chalk. Yes, Todd Gilliland, Daniel Hemrick, Anthony Alfredo, Riley Herbst, Noah Gragson, like David Reagan, Josh Berry. Like these drivers are going to see ownership, but probably not as much ownership as, the Blaneys, the Bushes, the Stenhouses, the Dillons. So I'm going to try to be over the field on some of these back marker plays that start a little bit, that are a little bit cheaper and start maybe a little bit higher up than, or maybe aren't as in good equipment. And then I really like, the kind of the 25th through 29th range, the Ryan Preeces, the Allmendingers, the LaJoys, the Cascarallas, like, I'm going to have a decent amount of ownership there as well. So that's going to do it for our Daytona 500 video. Hopefully that's helpful. Hope you guys have a good race weekend. Hopefully it's a good DFS day for us. Be interesting to see when they finally get this race in with all the rain. But so glad to just be back with NASCAR, talking NASCAR DFS and doing it with all you guys. So thank you and best of luck, and I'll catch you on the next one.